Hello everybody and welcome to this Biggerplate webinar, which is looking at mind mapping for business. So this is an introductory webinar. My name is Liam, I'm the founder of Biggerplate, and I'm just going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour through some of the, I think, most important potential uses of mind mapping in a business context, based on lots of years of learning and experimenting with this stuff and working with lots of different organizations all over the world as part of our member community. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session. I'm going to be presenting around this particular mind map here. We're going to start over here and work our way around it. So I'm going to dive straight in to the welcome section of our map and just give you a brief introduction to the session, really. So as I say, my name is Liam. I'm the founder of Biggerplate.com. If you want to reach me after the session with any questions or feedback or follow-up areas, you can email me direct at liam@biggerplate.com. And I'll be delighted to take your questions and pick up with you there. In terms of Biggerplate, if you are not familiar with us, I'm going to just give a brief overview here of what we do, what we're about. So Biggerplate doesn't make mind mapping software. We don't sell mind mapping software. We focus on mind mapping in sort of three key areas: templates, tutorials, and training. So templates is probably what we're best known for over many years, is a library of mind mapping templates and examples, thousands of mind maps that have been created and shared by members of our global community. We've got a community of about 175,000 members, and they have created and shared mind maps, which you can then download and explore and work with yourself. And of course, you can also share your own mind maps. We also have a huge range of tutorials, very practical tutorials in our pro area, which you can watch anytime. They're software specific, and they're going to show you a little bit more of the depth of how to do certain things with certain software. And what we're really building up a great sort of library of now over the last 3 or 4 years is a library of pro webinars. So that's where we have guest speakers from around the world talking about practical use cases for mind mapping in their particular area of expertise. And I'll show you in a second just kind of what we've got coming up there. And then the final T is our training. We provide both virtual and on-site training in mind mapping and mind mapping software. We provide this for organizations of all shapes and sizes. So if that's something you would be interested in, then please get in touch. But to just jump over very quickly to Biggerplate, just to give you a little sense of where we are. So this is the homepage of biggerplate.com. And as you can see, you can dive straight into the library and just start to search for some content here. And that'll operate like any other search engine and start to find you some mind maps that might be relevant on a topic, which you can then download and use in your own software. I'll show you a couple of examples of us doing that during this session. As you can see, we've got the library covers business, education, and just general. That's things like book summaries, maps to help in the home, and all sorts of interesting things there. These are the pro webinars I mentioned earlier. We've got some great topics coming up. We've got mind mapping for key account planning, mind mapping for goal setting, project management and Kanban, and even mind mapping to help with search engine optimization. So that's part of our pro membership, which is our paid membership. That's $29 a year. Well worth taking a look at our pro membership to really start to leverage mind mapping tools. You've got on the site obviously sort of things you're going to see anywhere, which is showing you the most popular content. You'll be joining a community of over 175,000 members, and that includes people from some of the world's leading organizations. And Biggerplate is growing all the time and working with all different shapes and sizes of companies. And interestingly, if you want to even click into any of these companies, you can see these are the kind of mind maps that, for example, people at this company are downloading from Biggerplate. So you're going to be joining a very lively community if you haven't already. And if you're already a member, I welcome you to our community and encourage you to really get stuck in and enjoy what you can find there. So that's enough about biggerplate.com, but what about today? So this webinar is just an introduction. It's a bit of a taster, a simple overview of three key areas. And really these are sort of getting at three sort of use cases overall of thinking, planning, and action with mind mapping. And I'm going to give you sort of an example, and we'll just show some examples of how each of those can be sort of applied in a particular business use case. And hopefully they'll give you some ideas, some inspiration in terms of what you could do with mind mapping in your own business context. It's always useful for me to know who's on the call today, where you're coming from, and maybe even what is your level of experience or exposure to mind mapping tools, either as an individual or as a business. So if you want to use the Q&A panel here in Zoom to just drop in some questions or some perspectives on what you want to use mind mapping for, or what you're already using mind mapping for, that might be very useful for me. I ask in advance for your apologies if I confuse my screen sharing things here. I'm using Zoom as a new tool, or we're using Zoom rather as a new tool, so we're getting used to it. And I'm not even sure, for example, as I screen shared the Biggerplate site there, did it even switch over? Who knows? So let's dive into mind mapping, and hopefully I can keep the screen sharing and things working as we need to. So for those of you who are totally new to mind mapping, we tend to think of mind mapping as a very simple way of visually organizing ideas and information. We really don't think it's any more complicated than that, and it certainly doesn't need to be. Where we see mind mapping really being powerful in a business context is in supporting this process that you can see on the screen here. Now, this is not a diagram of ours. This is from a book I read many years ago called Game Storming, and this is where a sort of traditional brainstorming process should look like if it's done well. But really, the same framework can be applied to your meetings, to your projects, to your strategic thinking, anything really in the business context. The idea here is that you start at point A and you move through to point Z. But importantly, what we want to do is ideally go quite broad and big in our thinking, which is the diverge phase here. We then want to really bounce these ideas around. So in the first stage, we want to get as many ideas and information out as possible. Then we really want to start to compare them, contrast them, categorize them, and sort of hit them against each other and see what sticks. And that's what we sort of look about in the explore phase. And then finally, ideally, what we really want to be doing is converging on some outcomes, some priority areas, or some actions, or some clear described outcomes from whatever process it is. Now, we think mind mapping tools are really fantastic at underpinning this entire process from start to finish. If you've ever sat in meetings that feel kind of unsatisfactory, or you've been involved in brainstorming processes that really didn't seem to do a lot for the business going on, it's probably because you had sessions that sort of ticked off one or two of these stages rather than the full end-to-end. So mind mapping is a really great way, whether you're working individually or in a group, of sort of ticking off all three of these stages. And hopefully I can just illustrate with a few key examples how that's possible. So some key benefits of mind mapping, and particularly we're talking about mind mapping software. We use pen and paper and whiteboard mind mapping, but really we think that the power is really in mind mapping software tools. So the key benefits we see here are primarily this coherent single view. Mind mapping software is going to give you a great way to get both a macro sort of high level view of a situation and micro level details. It's very easy, as you can see even in this map, to zoom out and get a sort of big picture view, but also we can zoom right in and be looking at small details. And of course the mind map can just expand and keep going onwards and outwards, getting ever more granular. And I don't really think there are much better tools out there that can combine the granular and the macro view in one place. So that macro micro view in a mind map is very, very powerful. And in good mind mapping tools, the ease with which you can navigate through that information, zoom in, zoom out, move across, move around, is really very powerful. It's much easier than navigating pretty much any other sort of way of organizing this information. And importantly, a mind map is always going to have a really great sort of natural, implicit, easily built logic and hierarchy, which means information is always being looked at in context. You're always going to know a little bit more about the particular topic because of where it sits in relation to other things. And that's a really important part of our sort of business working, is not dealing with things in isolation. We need to understand, where does this fit in that bigger picture, in this wider scheme of things. And mind maps is going to be a great way for you to start to build up those pictures. Importantly, with using mind maps, we want to avoid creating documents that would become too wedded to or that become too fixed. And mind mapping software in particular is going to give you a great ability to flex and adapt to change, take in new information, build it into your plans, and really sort of move with the changing landscape. Business doesn't stay still, so we don't really want to have fixed documents that are really a snapshot in time. What we need are sort of dynamic, iterative documents that really can help us keep up with the changing landscape underneath us. And mind mapping software is a very good way of doing that. To just give you a sense of what other people say rather than just what we at Biggerplate say, our last global survey, which was in 2018, so last year, that was about, I think it was about 1,100 participants, or over 1,000 participants from our community. And we asked them in sort of open questions, what are your primary uses for mind mapping? And then we just gathered their answers and created this sort of graphic based on the most used words. So you can see some pretty clear kind of words emerging out here. It's planning, brainstorming, project, organizing ideas. So you're getting a sense of how people are using mind mapping just from this kind of very quick visual. In terms of the benefits, when we ask them what are the primary benefits you feel or experience from mind mapping, again, some clear words coming out here around organized thoughts, clarity, clear thinking and ideas. So you hopefully in that combination get a slightly more qualitative view of what and why people are using this tool. So let's think about these three use cases then. I said I'm going to help to just explore three areas: thinking, planning, and action with mind maps. So let's take a first look at our thinking area. So I use thinking as a sort of fairly broad term here, but really what I tend to think about is our objectives are to organize our thoughts, explore ideas and issues in our business context. And in our sort of working world, what we're probably trying to do more often than not is give ourselves some context for decision making. We're trying to maybe put some criteria or some thoughts in motion that are going to help us make a decision around A or B. We want to make sure we've thought through all the different variables and ideas before we make that decision. So if those are our objectives, what might we do and how might we support thinking? Well, how might mind mapping support thinking in a business setting? Well, to use just one use case, and again, I'm just choosing one use case to illustrate each of these kind of points, let's think about something like a strategic thinking exercise, which for this example, I'll just use a very simple SWOT analysis mind map. So why do we use SWOT analysis? Well, it's a pretty simple framework. Most people can engage with it, whether they are very experienced or very junior in a business. And it's a very easy framework for thinking, but it can also be done quite badly quite often. Whenever we run strategic thinking workshops and do strategic sessions with clients, quite often people have had a prior experience with SWOT analysis that has not been entirely satisfactory. Maybe lots of post-its or flip charts and really not a lot sort of happening afterwards, or it's sort of just feeling a little bit ineffective. So how can we do this with mind mapping? Well, let's assume, just for the sake of example, that we're doing this just by ourselves as an individual thinking exercise for the moment. We always talk about using this kind of four-step model as just a little frame of reference. It's not a set of rules. You don't have to follow it at all. But we have found it over the years, this has been a pretty useful frame of reference for people to just get them started. And it's a process of capturing our ideas and information first, then doing some categorization and sorting and batching things. Then we want to really start to do some prioritization, figure out which of those things matter the most. Then and only then do we actually move into the planning stage. What we see in here a lot in business context is people jumping straight to that fourth step. We are all under a lot of time pressure and urgency is sort of non-stop. So quite often our inclination is jump straight to the planning and the doing. Actually, we need to pause a little bit more often. We need to think a little bit bigger. We need to capture and categorize all of the variables and pieces of information, figure out what matters most, and then start making sure we're planning the right things in the right areas. So just keep that sort of four steps in mind, and here's how we might approach that as an example of how mind mapping might help to build out a SWOT analysis. So I've got sort of four sort of versions or four iterations, if you like, of a mind map here that I'm just going to try and talk through and demonstrate. So let's start off, for example, firstly with a blank mind map. So maybe you sit down to do your SWOT analysis. We're getting towards the end of the year, so you might start to think you need to sit down and think about the next year. What are you going to try and change, do differently, do better, do more of? So we might start with just a very simple template and just start to write out our strengths. So perhaps we think good people might be something we put in there. We might put brand strength. We might put client list. And then something might just trigger in our mind and say, well, actually client list, we have that issue with our weaknesses, maybe our systems are behind where we want them to be. Systems issues, we'll just say. Maybe another weakness, maybe we're understaffed. Perhaps we've got good people, but not enough of them. And very quickly in our mind map, we just start to build out. And even at this early stage, if you wanted to, you could start to build out some of the detail and the additional thoughts. So maybe understaffed in tech might be your area. So just encourage yourself to extrapolate and expand just a little bit further if you want. But at this early stage, what we really just want to do is just populate our mind map with lots of ideas under each of these main headings. So again, we could say expansion, partnerships, all sorts of other things might go under opportunities. And similarly with threats, we'll end up with something that looks a little bit like this to start with. So we've just done a capture process. So if we just started with that blank template, we get to something like that. And then what we really want to do is start to categorize. So here's a sort of pre-prepared map where I've populated the list, and you'll see we've got a lot of things now under each of our main headings. So we've got strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And what we would encourage people to do, whether you're doing this individually or in a group, this worked really well in mind mapping, is just start to look at the list. And you might have created this list even using post-it notes. But now start to kind of categorize them and say, well, what are we getting at here? Well, there's a couple of items in here that maybe are people items. So let's say skills, experience. Experience is in there twice, so we can get rid of that duplicate. We can say subject, experts, creative maybe. So we start to batch what we, our industry maybe. We start to batch what we see in our list and start to create these categories within our SWOT map. And we do this for each one of these kind of things. So again, we could create a batch here, maybe under collaboration. Let's use someone outside. We could say collaboration, understanding priorities, knowing what each other is doing. Meetings maybe is another issue. I see collaboration is already in there. Working in silos, that seems pretty there. We've got a few other areas here, lack of connectedness, we can put that in here. We've got a couple of things that seem to come under leadership, so maybe a lack of vision. Leadership is in there again. Need for openness. So we can just start to batch these things. And this is just a thinking exercise. And again, I'm just sort of making this up as I go along, but you can hopefully see how we would start to categorize this big long list. And this is the thinking exercise that we need to do. Before we start planning our actions, we need to start capturing all of the variables, all of the information, and building out a little bit of a picture. So jumping back to our map, what we want to try and do after we've done all of our categorization is then starting to prioritize that list. So this is where I'd encourage you to employ what we call our top three thinking. So after you've categorized your big long list, what we really want to do is figure out which of those things matter the most. So under strengths, that same list that we had a second ago, we've got sort of two main headings here, people and sector. I said our industry, but let's say these are our strengths. What we then want to try and do is articulate in a new box that I've created up here, well, what matters most? So out of here, all of these items down here, which we've captured, can we summarize in just 3 items up here what we think are the most important things? Well, 1 could be our leadership position, 2 is our strong team, and 3 is our subject passion. Now, importantly, here's where I'm also starting to use functionality within the mind mapping software to make some of these things stand out a little bit more. So all of my top 3 areas have got this green arrow. I've formatted the topic to maybe look a little bit different. Again, I can do different things with this to make it stand out. And then I've also, under my priorities, started to use some of the icons. Again, I'm using Mind Manager today, but the same functionality exists in all good mind mapping software to start to say which one of these things matters the most and in what order. And I might change them around and say, actually, the strength that matters the most is our passion for our subject, and so on and so forth. What I want to have at the end of this process is a top 3 for each of these main headings. So I've captured a lot of information, and I know that all of the extra information is down here, but I'm summarizing up here in my top 3 things that I think are most important. And this is really now starting to move from an initial brainstorm of ideas and things that were on our mind, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We've categorized, and now we're prioritizing. So immediately we've gone through an explore, a diverge and explore, and now we're already starting to converge to really focus in on the priority areas that we want to impress or improve upon rather in the next era, for example, if we're doing this kind of strategic planning. So back one more time, I said we want to capture, categorize, prioritize, and then plan. So we've done our top 3 thinking, we've got our 3 main areas, but now it's time to actually start to do some of the planning. So we're still in this kind of thinking space. We've got a huge amount of ideas out, and if you're going through this process with a group, you should really be asking those groups, those participants, to tell you more. So when they say our leadership position, keep asking questions, keep pulling the threads, because the map can just keep building out with it, and it will just grow and grow and grow, and you can store all of that information there as that snapshot in time of what they're saying. But then we want to try and move to, well, what next? And this is where a lot of brainstorming processes sort of fall down, is they get a nice picture out, or they do lots of post-its or flip charts, and the action planning is normally some poor person has to go around and take photographs and try and write all of that up into some sort of coherent plan. It's not very realistic. So ideally what you could do using the same mind map is start to build out your next steps and your plan. So here's our prioritized mind map again. But what we could do up here, for example, if I just zone in on this strengths area, we could say we've identified our top three things, the things that matter most as our strength today. What are we going to do about them? So here's where we start to build out maybe some objectives and some actions. So for our leadership position, we could say, what is our objective? So maybe you use OKRs in your business, maybe not. So that stands for objectives and key results. So objective, you can think about as your aspiration. So in this example, we could say the aspiration is greater visibility for our work because we are leaders. Well, how do we measure that's happened? So how do we know we're doing that or have done that? So some key results, and this is where we're starting to plan tangible actions and outcomes and results that we want to see. So we're saying we want to get 2 articles this year, 10% visits, 20% social media, and we've included these little boxes here that are going to help us to keep track of our progress. So not only are we planning, but we're also giving ourselves in the same mind map still the ability to monitor and review our progress towards those goals, just using simple icons within the software. Similarly down here, we could say this is what we're going after. What are the actions we've got to put in place to get towards that? So again, we use a really simple framework at Biggerplate and with our clients to start action planning. And often people think this is too simplistic, but I guarantee you it works every time in terms of getting people to think of actions. Is we just say, okay, well, to achieve these 3 things, these results, what do we need to start doing, stop doing, do more of, and do less of? And very quickly, again, you can start to identify actions. So if we're going to get press articles, we need to start perhaps researching some press. We need to start gathering some user stories. Now, in this particular software here, I've started to use other features like assigning people to tasks. So this map that started life as a very simple sort of thinking, brainstorming exercise has now developed into a pretty comprehensive starting point for planning actions and monitoring our progress. So when Barney says, I've gathered some user stories, we could even in here say story 1, story 2, story 3, and maybe we could use functionality like hyperlinks to actually link off to perhaps a file on our computer, and we could just use and say, well, that's our user story 1, and we start to pull everything into one map continuously. Now we've still got a huge amount of other information here. We've got all of our thinking that went into this, but now we're really focused up here in the planning and action stage. We really are focusing in on tangible things that we can tick off, things we're going to stop doing, things we're going to do more of, do less of. So I'm hoping just in a very quick way here on this webinar, you see how we've moved from a pretty simple sort of brainstorming, listing out all the things that we can think of. We've moved through a process of exploring and kind of categorizing and thinking what else might be in there. So when we do our categorization, for example, we put all these 4 things in, but we should start thinking about, well, what else is there about people? Well, maybe we've got people who are international. Maybe that's a strength. So as soon as you start to create the categories in that second step, you'll also start to fill in more blanks. You'll start to think of other things that weren't in your initial brainstorm, but will come to mind once you create the category. And you can keep building out as you go and continually updating that map. But you hopefully see how we've moved through in one sort of map, albeit I've sped up the process, that you'd actually go through. You can go from start to finish, right through to action planning, all within one piece of software, one mind map. That is extremely powerful, and I genuinely still don't see any other tools or techniques that can be that effective in doing that. So I'm hoping that's given you a quick illustration of how you could both think and then also start to plan and act. So think, plan, and act is what we talk about a lot at Biggerplate. We say it helps you, mind mapping can help you to think creatively, plan collaboratively, and act with clarity. So hopefully you can see even in this one example how that can work as an end-to-end process. And importantly, if I just come back up here, we've gone through this process. If you were to go through that example that I just showed, you've gone through this process, and by the time you arrive at point Z, you've got some very clear actions to tick off, priority areas, and hopefully real clarity, even though you've gone through a lot of brainstorming and thinking and creative thinking before that. to figure out where you should be focusing your attention and your efforts. So if anybody has any questions about the SWOT example I've just shown you, please feel free to throw them into the questions panel. I'd love to hear, have any of you tried SWOT analysis with a mind map before? Or actually, have you tried SWOT analysis with non-mind mapping techniques, and how did that go? Again, it can be a highly variable experience. So just to show you some other examples, and this is where I'm just going to have to check my screen sharing settings here. I want to just show you a couple of examples of other maps that people have created for thinking around business and strategic thinking specifically. And it's also going to give me an opportunity to just show you how Biggerplate works. So let me just say to share my screen a little bit more. Let's share that. So hopefully you're seeing my screen now. So if I click this link in here, what I'm going to do is just jump off to a website link, which is on biggerplate.com. And here's another example of a mind map that somebody has created for pestle analysis, just another framework for strategic thinking. And I could select to download that mind map. I just need to log in to Biggerplate. Again, remember this is free to do. Downloading mind maps, that's part of our free membership. So I can download this onto my computer. It's going to pull it down from the website. And any minute now, I can then open that up within my software and start to work with it. So here's another thinking template to help you consider the political, economic, social, etc. factors affecting your business, and whether you're a small startup business or a large corporate enterprise, these factors may affect you in different ways. And this is a great way of just starting to build out the picture for your business today using the mind map. And again, you could apply all of those same principles before to capture, categorize, prioritize, and plan. Similarly, this idea over here of a strategic planning map in Biggerplate. I won't download this because I haven't got too much time, but here's another example of how you could, someone else has created a mind map. Again, you could download this from Biggerplate, pull it onto your computer and start to sort of build it out, fill in the blanks, get rid of the bits you don't need. But you can see how lots of people and businesses are going to use mind maps to expand their strategic thinking, take stock of their situation. And then importantly, what you can also do within the same document is start to plan and build out your actions and what you're going to do. I think that's very, very powerful and again, quite unique, I think, to mind mapping tools. So let me just change my game back here to just this. And hopefully you're seeing a little bit less on your screens. Again, please let me know if any questions. I can see we've got a couple of questions, so that's great. If you have any more, I'd love to hear them. So that's how you might use mind mapping in your business to support your thinking. But also I've started to get a little bit into the planning stage. And that's, again, taking us over here to our next use case, really. Now, I'm not going to go too far into this because we don't have time, and I've sort of covered planning a little bit in that last section, when you can start to build out, once you've identified your priority areas, start to build out the tangible actions and break things down until you start to arrive at actions. But in terms of planning using mind maps, our objectives more often than not are to capture requirements. We really want to engage quite often, I think, in more collaborative planning. Lots of you will probably have experienced coming up with a very clever plan, introducing it to people, and immediately having it shot down for all sorts of reasons. If you can engage people in the planning process at different stages and earlier on, help them to see that their input has been built into the plan, it's going to have a much greater chance of buy-in from other people and hopefully a much greater chance of success overall. Our plans also should help us to manage and monitor all the different things going on. Now, again, I've illustrated that a little bit in our SWOT example, but just to give you an example of, for example, a project we might run. Again, if I'm just clicking over to Biggerplate, let's just share that again. Clicking over to Biggerplate here, I've got an event planning mind map. So let's say an event, a conference of sorts is our project. I can download that map and open it here in my software. And it's the same principle. We've got our categories already here. We've got logistics, guest list, program agenda, publicity, and budget. But what we can start to do is then build out the things we need to think about for our project, in this case, an event. So, for example, location, I might actually just change and say, oh, well, I need a venue heading before. And here's where we could start to say, what are our requirements? And we could start to think about things like capacity, facilities. Now we maybe also start to think about location. But see, I would change the map around a little bit, I'd probably say logistics, venue, I'm going to start with there. And then I'm going to think requirements, location. I might then start to think about logistics in terms of transport, things like this, local, international. And really quickly, we can start to build out our project plan, in this case, an event, very quickly using software. We can start to use all of those same features we did before. We could say using notes and hyperlinks to link to different venues. So we could even have a short list within our map here. So venue A, venue B, and so on. We could be linking to those venues. So I don't know, I'll use Biggerplate as another link example. But let's say we find a venue that we perhaps like. We can save it here in the software. And we could even go further and start to do a little bit of a pros and cons. We could use these symbols within the software to maybe give a little pro, con. We might say good location, good transport. We might say poor light, I don't know what it might be. But we're starting to build up a project plan pretty quickly. Now, you hopefully can see, even in this very sort of trivial little example here, how quickly I, as an individual, can start to build out my plan. And I could have started from scratch, or you can start with a template. But this works just as well in a group setting. You need somebody to control the mind map, which takes some skill, but not too much, particularly if you can facilitate the session sensibly. You can just pull perspectives from your team. Some people will know particular things about certain things. So somebody might be in charge of the guest list. So let's put their name against that item. Let's say Barney, again, is in charge of our guest list. And then Barney is going to be the person to say who is invited, who's confirmed absent. And this, again, it not only helps us to do our planning, but it's also going to help us with monitoring our progress and our ticking off of our actions once we get down to that action level within the mind map. So using the same principles as the SWOT analysis mind map, we can really start to build out tangible actions and activities in here. Compile the invite list, for example, might be our action. We can assign it to Barney. We can say how far through the process he is. We can even, in this particular software, we can put a date on it to say when it needs to be done. Once we get into this level of planning, we could also start to use functionality like filters. So perhaps this is a very important task. And this is another area where mind mapping software can help you zoom in on the really important stuff really quickly. So if, for example, I wanted to just close down this mind map, and maybe it gets quite big, I want to just see anything that I've marked with that icon. So what I can do here is actually pop open a little filter mechanism here and say, show me everything that's got that marker on it. And it's just going to reduce the map down to focus me right in on that area, that item that I've marked as urgent. So in terms of project management and keeping track of where we're up to with a particular project, the ability to filter in and hide all the things we don't need to see right now is very, very powerful. So if you've got on a call with Barney just to talk about the guest list, you can now focus in on that area of the map and ignore everything else that's not relevant for the moment. Or you may want to keep it visible just to provide that little prompt, that context that we might like to have depending on what the purpose is. So that's my very, very simple example of a project planning or a planning sort of exercise in a mind map. But others you might find on Biggerplate, for example, some people use mind maps to create work breakdown structures. Now, it seems to have frozen. Is that going to work? So work breakdown structure, or WBS, is a sort of pretty well-established project management framework. I tend to talk about project management with mind mapping in terms of, I think mind mapping software is great for those of us who are not professional project managers. It helps this kind of project management for the rest of us. However, there are some really good principles in project management that you can sort of steal and borrow and use yourself. Work breakdown structure is one of them. Here's an example mind map that somebody has created. It looks slightly differently. It's structured slightly differently, and that's more in the sort of work breakdown style. Just let me clear off some of this so we can see. And you'll see this project has been broken down into initiation, control, and closure. And then within each of these steps, you've got a set of actions and plans. Again, you've got the little tick boxes to show how far through a process you are. And we've captured all of the requirements, or this person rather has captured all of the requirements in this mind map to then monitor and track their way through the project. And as things get ticked off, we know that we're just moving down the process and going across from initiation through to closure. So another example of just project planning, and just one more for luck. Here's a sort of more generic mind map style of project management, or sort of project planning rather. Again, we can download this from Biggerplate, nice and easy. Pulls it into our software, open up, get rid of the bits we don't want, but you'll see we've already got here some scaffolding really to build our plan around. Now, depending on your project or what you're planning, you may not need all of these things. You might not need to think about tolerance, threshold, whatever that means, contingencies. You might just start to go into the phase one and actually say, well, I think this needs to go here and this needs to go into more phase three. And the ability to move things around either by yourself or with your team and just figure out where things belong in relation to one another, break down the items you identify a little bit further. So if something's in the map and it's not clear enough, just keep breaking it down, and you can always just hide that information, but you know the detail is there. So hopefully that's given you a quick illustration of mind mapping as a sort of planning tool. And again, very interested to hear any sort of questions or ideas that you have around how you might use these tools for your own planning exercises anytime. So finally, we've already covered this a little bit, but let's go into a little bit further. We've done our thinking as a business. We've done our thinking individually. Maybe we've done thinking as a team. We've done some planning individually or as a team. And now it's time to actually start to action and keep track of things. So what are we trying to do here? Well, our objective really are to identify actions, visualize our priorities, and improve our productivity. So maybe start to think about this a little bit more as an individual. And this is where we, in our training, will get people to build a personal organizer mind map. It's a really simple way to get started with mind mapping. It's easy to understand. It's kind of relevant for everybody. And it's a pretty low risk experiment. You don't have to involve anybody else in it. You can just use it as a way of familiarizing yourself with your own work and your tasks and mind mapping tools if you're starting to experiment with them. So how might that start to look? Let me just check I've got this focus right. Let's look at that. So our example map here, again, I've just built one up in advance in sort of 3 stages, just so you can see how that might take shape. So let's imagine you start with a totally blank mind map like this, and just think about the sort of big headings in your working world. So you might think, okay, maybe there's meetings, maybe there's clients, maybe there's projects, and maybe there's admin. Whatever those big buckets might be, just throw them into the map. They might be wrong. You might change them later, but just come up with any 3 you can. So here's my example of how that might look at the beginning. You might say, I've got 6 main headings in my weekly planner. So I tend to use the word personal organizer now rather than weekly planner, because you don't start this every week. This becomes a living, breathing document it doesn't start again every week. You don't have to start the whole map from scratch. So this, once you've created, is kind of your structure for everything that's going on in your world. So you might have these kind of headings. And now what you could think about again is how might you subcategorize those headings? So how might you break down projects or meetings? What we want to avoid is just having a big long list of projects like this. That's not really helping us to break things down. So what we might start to think about is how could you break down those big topics into slightly different ones? So for example, with the projects, you might break them down by type. Maybe there's ongoing projects versus new projects. Maybe you might break them down by what role you're playing. Maybe that you break it down, projects I'm leading versus project I'm participating. You might just break them down by name. If there's only 2 or 3, that might not be a problem. Meetings, team, again, you might just try and think about different ways you could break down your big headings, subcategorize within there. So you've then got the option to start populating your map with some items. So let's take our projects branch again. We've decided we're going to categorize and then subcategorize into ongoing projects versus new projects. And now what we're seeing under here is actually starting to use some of the other functionality. So we've just built up this integrations project as an example. So maybe we've got integration with software 1, and here's where we've started to identify some very tangible actions again. Now, I could even go further and put that kind of person resource onto it. could say that's a Liam task, that's a Liam task, and then maybe that becomes a Graham task. So we can identify these actions, and again, we can just keep track of how far through we are with these icons, and we can make sure any given time we get a sense of our progress within the mind map, all from within our personal organizer map. Now, again, we might also start to link off to other maps. Maybe we've got projects that we've got underway. So the conference event that we were planning earlier, I could just have this little signpost in the map that says, go over here. And hey presto, I'm back at the map I was at earlier where I was doing my conference planning. So your personal organizer map can kind of become your control center from where you jump off into other things. It might be other maps, or it could be that you jump off into a Word document or an Excel sheet, whatever you might need to do to actually get the action done. And this mind map just becomes your sort of headline and your control center, as I say, your dashboard for keeping track of all the different things. So again, under meetings, you divide it into regular and exceptional. You've maybe got a weekly team review, and you've started to put in some actions here. We're using that exclamation symbol again to tell us maybe there's something that's a bit more urgent or is maybe off track. So that same filtering function I showed you earlier, if I wanted to, in my entire map, I could say, just show me all of the tasks that have that on it. And suddenly I'm also aware that there's something over here that I maybe had forgotten about, which is chasing client F under the invoicing tab. So again, maybe I tick that item off, remove that symbol, and then I'm just able to focus on where else is that symbol still in place. So preparing my meeting plan, that's where I need to focus my efforts. That's, I think, probably all I'm going to try and cover, because time flies by when I do these, and I find myself speaking very quickly and hopefully not too fast. But I'm going to go back now. I've got a lot of maps open here. I'm going to go back to my presentation map, which will be the first one over here. Just to illustrate, again, other examples of how other people do this. And these are maps, again, that you can download from Biggerplate if you wish. So here's a personal organizer template that somebody else has created. I can download that onto my computer and open it up with the software. And now I can just get rid of the bits I don't need. I don't need that bit. Maybe I don't want that bit. And I can just zoom in here. You'll see how this person is organized. They've got a pretty comprehensive map here. They've got projects organized by work, personal, home, and school. They've got tasks, recurring, schedules completed. This is a very comprehensive person organizer. And you may decide, actually, I don't need my address book in here. So again, take the template, adapt it, and make it your own. But if you can get all of your kind of headlines and signposts and information in a personal organizer mind map, it's going to make it far easier for you to jump across to the things you need to do when you need to do them. So just get back here. Too many things open now. Here we go, back to our start. Okay, so I won't open up any other maps because it's getting very confusing. But what I can do is just wrap up. So for you as attendees, I'd really encourage you to do the following if you haven't already. So I'm hoping you're all already members of Biggerplate as free members at least. That's free membership on Biggerplate. It enables you to upload and download mind maps, so that's a great resource to just make use of. For business people, I'd really encourage you to upgrade to Biggerplate Pro. You're going to get access to a lot of extra things, pro webinars, tutorials, special offers, and a lot more. I showed you we've got webinars on all sorts of things, and it's worth also just noting that in terms of pro membership, you've got not only webinars that are coming up. So if I'm back on Biggerplate, I just click, here's the webinars coming up. We looked at these already, but you'd also be getting access to, I think, somewhere in the region of 90 recorded webinars that we've hosted previously that were our calendar. So there's a huge range here: strategic planning, business planning, for learning, for online freelancers, for project management, a huge range of tutorials here that I'd really recommend. And that's where we've got guest speakers from all over the world, all over our community, sharing how they are using mind mapping, different tools and different kinds of company, different types of business, but a huge, huge resource for learning and improving your use of mind mapping and the effectiveness of your use of mind mapping. So I'd encourage you to to have a look at Biggerplate Pro. Check your email after this session. You'll get a notification when the recording is ready. And in that email, I'll also be including a little coupon code that'll give you a discount on Biggerplate Pro as a thank you for taking time out of your day to watch today. If you want to try and introduce mind mapping into your organization, whether you're a small, large, or medium-sized business, or not even a business, if you're just running any sort of organization or involved, you want to introduce mind mapping to your team, then have a look at our training options as well. We've got some really great experience running training for all sorts of different organizations. And the training sessions, in whatever form you take them, they can be virtual or in-house on-site sessions. We cover the basics of mind mapping. We cover personal organization with mind maps, mapping for teams, and mapping for strategic thinking. Obviously, in much greater depth than I've been able to do in a 45-minute webinar. So those are my little sort of pitches, if you like, at the end. But please do also feel free to contact us. My email is there on the screen right now. I really would welcome your questions, your feedback, your comments about anything, whether it's this specific webinar or Biggerplate in general. I'll be very happy to help. But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is just now open up my questions panel and see if I've got some questions I can answer for you. So thank you for your questions. So there's a great question here. Sorry if I wasn't clear at the beginning. What software am I using? That's a good first step. So which software am I using? So this is Mind Manager. Mind Manager. Very, very good software, very powerful, a lot of features in here. We know that quite a few people maybe have Mind Manager and don't use all the features and functionality. I'm one of those people. I use probably about 20% of what this software can do, but I love it. It's a great program. It's one of our favorites. It's one of the more expensive mind mapping software options, so there are others available. If you want to have a look at software and get a little bit of a summary of all of them, again, have a look at biggerplate.com. In the main menu, there's an item that says software. If you look at that, it's got a directory of a lot of the best software that's around and just gives you a little bit more information on there. So that'll probably answer your questions around software a little bit better than I can in this particular session. Other questions I've got. Is it free to download? Yes. Sorry. I'm not sure about your question there. Is it free to download, whether we mean software or maps? So free downloads, I'll say yes, maps, maybe for software. So depending on whether your question is about software or mind maps, if you're looking for mind maps that you can download for free, that is free from Biggerplate. It is the largest independent resource for mind maps in the world. We've got thousands of mind mapping templates, and you can view them and download them for free just by registering with us as a basic member, which is free of charge. So hopefully that answers that. Next question. Thank you all for the questions. If I have a question here, Lisa, thank you for your question. If I have Mind Mapper software, am I able to use mind maps created with other software? Lisa, that's a good question, challenging me off the top of my head. Mind Mapper is another great product, so let me just put that one in the names here. Which software? Mind Mapper. That's from a company called Simtech, so I assume, Lisa, that's what you're using. Can I open other formats? That is going to be really dependent on your software. And Lisa, I apologize, I can't think off the top of my head what Mind Mapper can import. So within Mind Mapper, you will almost certainly have some import functions, and that will probably import at least one other mapping software format. So lots of software will be able to import Mind Manager maps because it was one of the first earliest products. So you may find that Mind Mapper can import Mind Manager files. It may be able to import others, but I can't remember off the top of my head, and I haven't got it on this particular machine, so I can't check quickly for you. The answer is almost certainly yes. If you encounter problems where you've got a map on Biggerplate that you really want to get, but it's not compatible with your format, and that's the issue, unfortunately, we have, the software doesn't always talk to each other. So if you come across a map that you really want to get, it's not compatible, again, just drop us a note, and we can quite often come up with a little way of getting it into a compatible format for you. So Lisa, I hope that answers your question. Sorry, it's a bit of a roundabout way of saying maybe. But yes, if you have any questions or you find any maps that you want, but it's not compatible with your software, let us know, and we might be able to do a couple of conversion tricks for you behind the scenes. Any other questions? Questions around training? So question around training, great. I like a question. Training in USA, yes. So the question is, do we do training outside of the UK or in the USA, for example? Yes, we do. Our biggest client in the US, for example, is the client, can't type anymore, in USA is the CDC. That's the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, for anybody who doesn't know. So huge government organization. We do training over there for them a lot. But yes, we do training all over the world. And if we can't deliver the training ourselves for any reason, languages or availability, we have a growing network of partners that we can put you in touch with as well. So if there's a more appropriate person or organization to deliver training in your region or for your team, then we can do that. But if your training is USA, Canada, United Kingdom, that's probably our sort of sweet spot for training delivery. And again, that can be virtual, delivered via webinars, or it can be on-site in your office or somewhere in person. That's our favorite kind of workshop because they're the most interactive, most fun. So yes, training, if you have any questions on that, check out biggerplate.com/training, surprisingly. And that will give you some answers on training. There's some more information being added to the training pages as we speak. So so go and take a look at that, and it might be useful. And if you want to speak to us about what training you might want to do or areas you might be interested, then that's something we'd be very happy to do. So I'm looking at the questions. I think I've covered all of them so far. So I'll just hold on in case there's any remaining questions. But in the meantime, I'll just say a huge thank you for joining me. I know everyone is always very busy, so joining webinars, particularly live, is quite tricky for some people. Lots of people tend to watch these on replay. So I'm hoping I've given you some ideas of how you can use mind mapping in your work, in your business. It's a whistle-stop tour, so I'm very aware it's not comprehensive. It's not intended to be. It's just supposed to give you a little bit of food for thought and a bit of an illustration. But if you just think about mind mapping on the whole as being something that can help you think, plan, and act, but all in one place, that's probably my best summary of mind mapping for business. And that applies whether you're working as an individual or working with teams or even working with clients. So mind maps can be a great way of actually engaging your clients and your customers in a process as well. So actually having them see the mind map and building mind maps with them, getting their perspectives into a mind map and facilitating a discussion using mind maps is a really powerful way of helping your clients and customers feel more involved, more engaged, and more ownership of a particular process as well. So thinking, planning, and acting a little bit more collaboratively at every step is something I think we're all in need of. I see a lot of businesses needing to improve in that area. So hopefully today I've given you some ideas on how you might do that. But if you have any follow-up questions or would like to explore any aspect of this further with us, including designing templates for your business to align with your processes and how you do things, we'd be very delighted to hear from you. So I think that's all from me. I can't see any new questions coming in. So thank you all for your questions and for joining. So I'll say thank you for joining me one last time. And in the meantime, good luck with your mapping.